I'm Dr. Bob Houlihan. I'm a professor of intercultural communications here at the university, and I've just retired just a month or so ago. And I've been here at the university about 13 years and just love this place. This is one of the most incredible educational institutions in all of America, maybe the world. And so I've had just a marvelous time training missionaries. And so if we would stop, I could probably go to almost any country in the world where one of our students who studied here and then has gone on and done, or he is now probably presently doing missions work in those countries. When I first came here 13 years ago, we only had 11 what we call missions trips. Well, no, the first there was just 3. And then the first year when we started, we had 11, but now there's well over 50 groups that go out all over the world. Dr. Chris Owen and myself work together on this, and we've had the privilege of seeing our young people go and learn intercultural studies. My purpose was I wanted them to have a theology in the classroom, but then have a practical outcome of that theology, that missiology on the field. Because if you don't have a practice, if you don't have something putting that what you've learned out in among the people, well, then it really doesn't do much good, just in your own brain. Mm. But our students are doing that everywhere, and many of them, I get word from them all the time. They're joining different mission agencies and staying in missions. So that's a marvelous, marvelous thing. I just love that kind of work. Mm. So I'm really blessed. I came here because I came home from the field in Japan. I worked at headquarters for the Assemblies of God, and I was elected as the director for Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific is from China, way up North Mongolia, all the way down to the Pacific Islands, and then all the way over to India. So it's about 35 countries, and we had about 300 missionaries, 350 missionaries, husbands and wives, and then kids, and then a lot of short-termers. I had the privilege of opening up several countries like Mongolia and Laos and Vietnam again, and just where we go in at the very ground level and begin to see God do marvelous things. So I kind of see myself as a missionary educator. I love teaching, but I love on the field. I've taken groups of students to Ethiopia several times, into China, and wherever else we can go, into Honduras. So missions is what I live for. Mm. I became a Christian when I was 9. My mom was saved under the ministry of Amy Semple McPherson, who's an old-time Pentecostal. And I'm from California originally. Yeah. But my dad died quite suddenly. I was only 9, and I guess out of that desperation, I began to call out to God as a kid. And then somewhere around 14, 15 years of age, I had a call to missions. I said, this is what I want to do. I want to go and share the gospel to the world. And Billy Graham was really big, at this time, and these big crusades. And so I could see myself, at least in my mind, preaching to a lot of people and crusades all over. But that's not what God did, because you can't have a crusade in many countries, it's not possible. But what I actually found out and did, we started a television program and we'd share the gospel, and we had probably 800,000 to 900,000 people every Sunday watch our TV program. So, God lets you do things. You don't know exactly how he's going to do that. Mm. And so it becomes really, really wonderful. And so to be here and to kind of replicate myself with you young people, seeing you go to the world, I mean, what's better than that? Mm. And so I get letters, emails all the time from the students who may be going through different issues. I just got one yesterday from someone in Latin America, another one from Pakistan. So that's the kind of work I like doing. So it's a marvelous thing. I thought maybe, just for interest, you think, well, does the gospel really do things overseas, in these cultures? We have Muslim cultures, Hindu cultures, Buddhist cultures. And you think, does the gospel really impact people in these cultures? And so I'd like to tell you a story of a Japanese man who was military. His name was Mitsuo Fuchida, who was a crack pilot. And he's the one who led the attack on December the 7th, 1941 on Pearl Harbor. And most of you probably been watching some of the movies like Midway, and I just saw it the other night. So there's a lot of that. But Fuchida was an unbelievable pilot. He actually, over Pearl Harbor, he was up high, and so he guided in a little less than 400 Japanese aircraft. And as you know, they destroyed 4 of the big ships. They damaged 8 of the battle carriers. So, I mean, it was a horrible time for America. A surprise attack, yeah, but somehow our intelligence failed us. Anyway, Fuchida, after that attack, all the ships went home, and he was a commoner, but he was honored by the emperor, which is very, very unusual. So because he was such a crack pilot and did this great battle that was so successful, the emperor honored him just in one of those incredible moments. Well, then, which we don't know much about, he led an attack in Darwin, Australia, that was also very successful. Attacked the Australians. So, if you've watched the movie recently, you know all the planning that went into Midway was the place. And of course, Yorktown, they fixed up real quick. And the Americans, by probably the grace of God, were able to know where the Japanese was coming. Now, there was 197 ships in that armada, if you can imagine. Probably, they said that more fuel was used in that one armada of ships than the Japanese used in their military in the whole year. Oh. Because there's so many. Probably one of the largest armadas in history. So they were coming, and there's probably some doubt, but I think undoubtedly they were heading to the West Coast. If they'd have been successful there, because they already had submarines off the coast of California in a place called Santa Barbara. And so the Japanese probably would have attacked eventually, because Pearl Harbor was already hit hard. Fuchida, as it would be, had appendicitis. And so he was on the Yamato, which was the head ship, the battleship which controlled everything. And so he was in sick bay, so he could not fly against the Americans in Midway. But so he was watching the battle. And so he saw his navigator and his plane take off. And so he saw, there was 4 aircraft carriers, Japanese aircraft carriers, that went down by the Americans, and it was just a miracle. So few, I think it was only 29 dive bombers and 60 or 70 other airplanes. That they actually were unbelievable pilots and destroyed 4 aircraft carriers, which just shook the Japanese. Fuchida watched his airplane with his navigator go down in the fight. So what happened after that, when the last, I think it was Soyu, went down, the Japanese turned around and went home. Because, as history will tell you, that was the turning point of the war. It was at that point that the end was not in doubt. The Japanese were going to fight for 3 years, 4 years more, but somehow that battle changed the course of history. So Fuchida was really upset, because the Japanese have something called Bushido. It's that samurai spirit. And so they're very, very, very good in athletics and fighting. The Japanese were incredible warriors. But all of a sudden, things were not going well for them. And America was advancing. And so the war ended in 1945, August. And the Missouri came into Tokyo Bay, and then they signed the armistice and the Japanese surrendered. In fact, if you look at history closely, the emperor, wanted to surrender, but there were many people in the military that were trying to stop that. They didn't want to surrender. They would have fought to the last man. So we could talk a lot about history because it's so fascinating. So all of a sudden here, all the Japanese military are home, and so they have they've lost face. And Japanese culture, a lot of Asian cultures, if you do not achieve your objective, you lose face. In other words, so you actually kind of looked down upon by society. Because that's why the Japanese wouldn't surrender. They would harikiri, they'd rather commit suicide. Because just the shame of doing that. But he didn't. And so he's in Tokyo, Fuchida. Well, at the same time, there was an American named Jacob DeShazer. He read about the attack, and so he joined the military. He was in Oregon, joined the military. And he became one of the Doolittle Raiders. This is this battle that went off the Hornet, which was the aircraft carrier about 350 miles south of the city of Tokyo that was undiscovered. And these B-17 bombers, they actually took off and they bombed Tokyo. But without enough fuel to get back, they were going to land, hopefully, in the free China. But many of them crashed in the Japanese-occupied part of China. So Jacob DeShazer bombed Tokyo, and he ended up in a Japanese prison camp for 4 years. There were 8 in his crew. Strange, all of them were brought to Tokyo. The 7 other guys in his plane were killed. He was sent back to China for whatever reason. And so Jake is in China. He hates the Japanese just as much as Fuchida hates the Americans. And as God would have it, Jake is there, and the Japanese guard gives Jake a copy of the New Testament. And Jake is so eaten up with this hatred that he knew he had to do something. And so he began to read the Gospels. As he read the Gospels, he said the only way to survive is to what Jesus did, even through suffering, is to give your life. So he turned his life over to Christ in prison in China. So Jake became a Christian there. Well, the Americans, of course, then freed that prison, and he came back to the States, and he went to Bible school to study, and he returned to Japan as a missionary. So while this is going on, then Fuchida hears that his navigator, the guy who was his co-pilot, so to speak, was not dead, but was in a hospital in Yokohama. Now, Yokohama is just a little bit south of Tokyo. So he went to visit his friend, and here he's in the hospital, and he's recovering. And so he asked me, he says, how in the world can you recover like this? He says, well, the Americans, took me out, and I went to hospital, and a Christian nurse brought me back, saved my life. But he says, the interesting thing was, he says, we actually killed her parents because they were missionaries in the Philippines. And we killed her parents, but she still had enough love that she actually took care of me and shared the gospel of Christ with me. Fuchida went crazy. He says, no one would do that. You always honor your parents. You would always, she should have killed him in the Japanese thinking, but she didn't because of the gospel. Well, Fuchida was coming back to Tokyo, and there's a famous station called Shibuya Station, and there's a little dog out there, Hachiko. Maybe you've seen the movie. There's a little stone statue. And somewhere in there, some missionary who had just come back to Japan gave him a gospel portion. And he couldn't believe the gospel. But he read the gospel portion, and through reading that, all of a sudden he gave his heart to Christ, and he could find relief from this hatred of the Americans. Well, somewhere along the line, then Jacob DeShazer, who came back as a missionary, and Fuchida became friends. And they would hold meetings all over Japan. So we were in Japan at this time, and so I talked with them, and I brought them together. We did a television program, these two enemies who now love each other and become followers of Christ and are serving the Lord by giving their hearts for people, to say that vengeance, hatred is not going to save the world. Mm-hmm. It's only the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Jacob DeShazer wrote a gospel portion. I was a prisoner of Japan. That went everywhere in Japan. Fuchida wrote one about a samurai Christian, and that gospel portion went everywhere. In fact, in the Tokyo Olympics this year in 2020, that piece of literature is going to be used by the Christian church to help all the gifts that come from all over the world to say, yeah, here's a man who hated the gospel of Christ. Only way he got relief was to turn his heart to Christ. So I'm just saying the gospel is powerful. Love is more powerful than hatred. God's grace is greater than anything. And forgiveness is the way to find peace in life. So both of these men forgave each other and found God. So that's just a great testimony to me.